Hello, I'm Jim Paxson. In our show today, we'll take you into the woods to see what's being done to protect people and wildlife from massive wildfires. All that and more coming up now on Arizona Wildlife Views.
Arizona Wildlife Views is brought to you by the sale of hunting and fishing licenses and the Heritage Fund, lottery dollars working for wildlife. Some projects made possible by the Sportfish and Wildlife Restoration Fund.
Welcome to our show. A healthy forest is essential to maintaining healthy and productive wildlife habitat. In our first story, we'll see what's being done today to prevent catastrophic wildfires in the future, and the positive impacts that work is having on both wildlife and the citizens of Arizona. Trees and setting fires. Believe it or not, this is just what the doctor ordered for Arizona's ailing ponderosa pine forests. They're in pretty sad shape, bone dry from drought and choking to death on dense thickets of scrawny little trees. Hello, can you see me? Here I am. Environmental litigation and failed forest management policies led to this: an unhealthy forest, too thick and overgrown, a serious threat from the risk of wildfire to people, property, and wildlife. My name's Jim Paxson. I've spent most of my life in the woods. I worked 34 blessed years with the Forest Service and 6 more with Game and Fish. The goal has always been the same: conserving and protecting our precious natural resources. You know, when I first got into the Forest Service, we tried to put every fire out by 10 a.m. the next day. And we thought we were doing good things in protecting the forest. It took us a whole generation of foresters to learn different. We now realize that fire suppression had severe unintended consequences for forest health. The same can be said about getting rid of logging. There's a general consensus that the level of timber harvest had become unsustainable by the late 70s. But environmental litigation aimed at protecting endangered species and old-growth forest did more than limit logging. It ultimately shut the industry down.
Nobody really anticipated the fire threat.
I got a chance to talk about that with Diane Vosick of the Ecological Restoration Institute at Northern Arizona University.
Well, in the 80s and 90s, a lot of things were happening. We had seen a lot of harvest. We had gone through this period of time where there was all this litigation to try and stop that whole activity from happening. And but what also happened along with that was that during the time where we stopped harvesting and people were out of the woods, we also saw an eruption of smaller trees that actually began at the beginning of the century when we took fire that would take out those small trees, fire that would stay on the ground and would regulate how many trees would be in the forest. We took that out because we wanted to fight fire. Everybody wanted to, they were afraid of fire.
It was a threat, wasn't it?
It was a threat. It was a threat to our natural resource base, people felt. And so we were very aggressive about suppressing fire. But we didn't anticipate that as a result of that, what we would see is a condition where many small trees that would normally not be established became established. They were growing over the 90 years, and then in the 90s, boom, we started seeing some of the really big megafires.
After a century of fire suppression, our forests are jam-packed with an unnatural accumulation of small trees that's like rocket fuel to a wildfire. It's a ticking time bomb just waiting to explode. Growing, gone. That's what happened in 2002 when the Rodeo Chetasky fire blackened 468,000 acres of ponderosa pines on the Mogollon Rim in east-central Arizona. I went to my first wildfire in 1969. It burned 200 acres and was considered a pretty big fire. The Rodeo Chetasky fire in 2002 was almost 500,000 acres, burned 460 homes and 6 businesses, evacuated 35,000 people for upwards of 2 weeks. It was a fire of epic proportions. It did a lot of damage, but in the end, it also did some good, especially for wildlife.
After the Rodeo Chetasky fire, certain areas that burned in a high severity to a moderate severity, a lot of the canopy, the oak and ponderosa pine and juniper canopy was removed, which created a very beneficial habitat for wildlife, a lot of the wildlife species, in that it created these open areas where the sunlight and water were better able to penetrate the soil, and it grew more feed.
The mule deer population increased dramatically in the years following Rodeo Chetasky because the fire stimulated new growth of a plant called ceanothus.
It's commonly referred to as buckbrush because it's such a valuable forage for deer. The new plants have the highest amount of nutrition. The older stands become decadent, they lose their nutrition value, and the plants don't live all that long. So they stay at a higher level of nutrition and are a more robust, vigorous growing plant when they actually are burned at about a 10 to 15 year interval. And it's going to be one of those things that if we want to continue to see those increased population parameters in our deer herd, it will be imperative that we bring fire back into these areas and do what we can to maintain the benefits that were from the Rodeo Chetasky fire.
Definitely have to get all the fuel, the torches situated before we start our test burn. Once you get all your resources and your fuel's ready, let me know. I have plenty of maps, but I just assume everybody has one. So everybody's good with the organization, what we have, our map. It's approximately about 20-25 acres our test burn will be conducted, so that'll be right in this general area.
In December of 2015, the Game and Fish Habitat Partnership Committee teamed up with the Forest Service to treat 2,700 acres of the Rodeo Chetasky burned area with prescribed fire.
So we'll have a bunch of igniters. They'll be carrying drip torches.
The project has 2 main goals.
Well, one, fuels reduction, and also just increase habitat for wildlife.
Dave Rainey is the burn boss. He's responsible for keeping everyone safe and making sure the fire remains in prescription.
Tonight, weather partly cloudy with high clouds.
It's his job to monitor weather conditions, including wind speed and direction, temperature, relative humidity, and the moisture level of fuels on the ground.
Yeah, dispatch, at this time we've completed our test burn and we are meeting our objectives, so we'll continue on with ignition.
By burning grasses and pine needles, they're getting rid of the primary fuels that carry fire across the forest floor. Later, they'll be back with a higher intensity burn to take out more brush and debris that's built up below these stands of beautiful, mature ponderosa pines.
So what we're trying to do is get the punch knocked out of the area where we have our pine stringers. So we reduce any kind of potential for the upcoming season to have it go up into the crowns and nuke our timber back out.
Well, from a game and fish perspective today, what we're really hoping to accomplish is just to improve wildlife habitat If we can get some of these hillsides burned off and see new plants coming in, that's a good day for deer habitat.
These ecosystems adapt. They're adapted to fire. They depend on fire. They depend on the right kind of fire.
The right kind of fire is the kind Mother Nature intended. A low-intensity fire that burns on the ground and not in the treetops. That sort of fire cleans up the forest, keeps small trees from getting out of hand, and typically burns right past the larger ponderosa pines.
Just similar as like a landscaper would prune up a tree to protect it, help it grow better. Fire does the same thing in these ecosystems. This next entry of fire through here will actually probably put a higher scorch on the boles of these trees. And the intent there is to get rid of the lower dead limbs, prune those canopies up, because that's how ponderosa pine survives higher severity fires, because those canopies are 30, 40, 50, 60 feet off the ground, depending on the size of the tree. And that allows that ground fire to pass underneath it without, causing a crown fire and killing the tree. So it doesn't mean everything that you see here today will be alive next year. It won't. Some of this low intensity ground fire will get in and kill a tree, but that's the natural way to thin a forest and kind of how Mother Nature intended it.
Unfortunately, the overgrown forest of today tend to produce fires that burn extremely hot. When flames get into those doghair thickets, they climb into the crowns of mature ponderosas, and fire quickly spreads out of control. The rodeo Chetasky fire motivated folks to do a lot more thinning in the forest. But after 9 years, it was clear they had not done enough. In 2011, the Wallow Fire scorched more than 500,000 acres of prime wildlife habitat in Arizona's White Mountains. It outdid rodeo Chetasky, becoming Arizona's all-time largest wildfire.
All of a sudden we saw these unprecedented fires that we've never seen before, destroying wildlife habitat, destroying endangered species habitat, threatening communities. And I think there was a coming of minds around the fact that a solution was needed, even among the most litigious environmental groups.
Longtime adversaries united behind a U.S. Forest Service plan to restore ecosystems on a scale never attempted before. It's called FORFRY, the Forest Restoration Initiative. It's a 20-year plan to thin 2.4 million acres across the Kaibab, Coconino, Apache Sitgraves, and Tonto National Forests.
Well, the most exciting thing is that we are tackling the problem at the scale of the problem. FORFRY covers 2.4 million acres across 4 national forests. Our fires, Wallow, rodeo Chetasky, were in the 400 to 500,000 acre range. That meant we needed to be thinking about the solution at the same scale. And so FORFRY was a revolution in that sense.
We're really trying to do something that hasn't been done before, in the sense that we're trying to, over a 20-year period, which isn't that long, really put these forests back on a very significant restoration trajectory. So really the scale of the effort is unprecedented, and we think we're going to succeed.
Ethan Almack is Conservation Director for Grand Canyon Trust, an environmental advocacy organization that's part of the FORFRY stakeholder group. It's a diverse group of dozens of organizations from the public and private sectors, and it includes many folks who have not always seen eye to eye. What is it about FORFRY that has brought one-time adversaries together?
Well, it's really, first and foremost, it's a sense of urgency. With the megafires we saw burning, with the rodeo Chetasky fire and the Wallow fire burning, it really created a sense of urgency among stakeholders that we had to not only do something, but something real big and ambitious, and do so urgently to get ahead of the wildfire curve.
Diane, what do you as a researcher and an ecologist see as some of the greatest challenges we face?
Well, it's interesting because some of the greatest challenges we face are actually more social science than biological science. And that is that the forest restoration problem is one we have the science to solve.
We can do that.
We know how to do it. But we have a big problem with the small trees we need to remove from the forest. They are low value. You can burn them for energy, but right now with cheap energy, you actually, it's expensive to use them as energy. So we are struggling to find markets for the small trees that we need to remove from this forest. So it's an economic problem, if you will, because we're relying on the private sector to try and help us solve this problem. But if they can't make money from the trees that they're removing, we got a problem.
It is a problem, or rather, a challenge that Jason Rosemond and his company, Good Earth Power, are working to resolve.
You know, we're taking down a lot of smaller size timber.
They hold the contract for phase 1 of Forfry. That's a 10-year contract to thin 300,000 acres. I met up with Jason near the city of Williams, where his crews were hard at work doing some much-needed forest restoration.
So the contract prescription requires us to cut anything that's 3 feet or higher, even if it's only an inch thick. And as a result, we need to make sure that we look at every single type of product we can produce out of any size fiber. Obviously, the easy stuff is if we're creating lumber from logs, which is the kind of traditional industry model. What's more difficult is how do we take the biomass and create mulch or some type of wood chips or hog fuel and use that.
Hog fuel's used for what? Making electricity? Or?
Yeah, electricity. So, for example, the Novo Power has a power plant over, in the Snowflake area. We transport fuel even from over here down to them. I probably have 10 loads going to them today. You know, we knew the task when we took it on, that we had to take everything out that's even not normally monetizable. But yes, we have to remove everything. And it's to create a better landscape. It's to help alleviate problems with, or potential problems with bark beetle. If you leave too much fuel on the ground, it's going to be fuel for forest fires. Right. So it's all got to go.
You know, we see orange paint on this tree with a stump mark down at the bottom, but the whole idea is the orange paint means that tree's going to stay.
That's right. And that paint will fade over time.
Yes, it will.
And the Forest Service is brilliant. I mean, they come out and they mark these trees. I mean, imagine how much time it takes to come out and mark 1 million trees.
That's a lot of paint.
That's a lot of paint.
This just really does make me smile from the inside out, because this is good use of the resources. It's light on the land. We just need to be doing more of it.
Go faster, I hear that a lot.
Yeah, I'll bet you do. You know, finding ways to make a profit from tree scraps and leftover biomass is certainly difficult, but so is rebuilding an industry that's been dormant for decades.
We've had to design new mills that will not only produce chips, but eliminate chips. And that's why we're integrating mills with bagging lines, which I think is something that we haven't seen around here before. When you first come in and you want to thin a forest, the product needs to go somewhere. So the first thing we had to do is actually identify customers. And so we identified a number of different product ranges, ranging from mulch, bark, soils, merchandising trees down to smaller levels, so you do utility poles. But yes, we have had to almost design the airplane while flying it, is how I liken it.
Good Earth Power is making major upgrades to both this sawmill in Williams and the larger lumberjack mill in Heber. It's also building a state-of-the-art flagship mill that should be completed by May of 17. Good Earth Power is making a huge investment in Arizona. Tell me a little bit about that investment and what that means for the state of Arizona.
Well, we've invested, we have 146 staff. We've invested $28 million to date. In the next 18 months, between now and May of 2017, it's $107 million more dollars and 1,000 total employees.
So 135 million total in Arizona.
That's right.
The solutions we're putting on the table are tremendously important. I can say that I think this issue is the most important issue, not only for northern Arizona, but in the state and across the nation in many respects, in terms of what we're trying to achieve and what we can achieve over the next 20 years.
What we're doing is we are thinning out the small trees. We are bringing back some of the industry infrastructure that's necessary to do that job, and along with that, good jobs for rural communities, which is a nice benefit from forest restoration.
Of course, the main goal is a healthy habitat where fire is more friend than foe, a place with far fewer trees per acre than we find in the jam-packed forest of today. We know what the landscape is supposed to look like thanks to a century of data collected right here at Fort Valley Experimental Forest in Flagstaff.
The data spans from 1905, so we have a very long body of information that tells us that when we thin and when we burn, the big trees respond favorably. You know, one thing that in this research site we found, we took out the small trees, and our older trees, they started having sap flow again. They showed more bark beetle resistance through their resin, their ability to pitch out bark beetles. So what we know is that when we thin it out, we restore individual tree health and forest health.
When you open this up, you're going to get new vegetation growing, and we see nothing but an increase in the diversity of wildlife and their ability to use this piece of ground.
We like to say that the elk that come back in after we thinned an area are the chief inspectors, making sure we're doing a good job. So, but we've seen antelope coming back into the area.
And we're diversifying wildlife habitat with your operations here, so my hat's off to you. This is great work, great work.
Thank you so much.
I think one of the more interesting aspects of Forefry is that we can do what's right for the forest, and at the same time do what's right for watersheds, do what's right for wildlife, do what's right for communities, and we can do so in a fashion that is really strengthening for rural economies. This is one of those situations where everybody can win. It's incredibly rewarding to be working on a project that is improving the health of these forests that I call home.
You know, if we look at this from Mother Nature's standpoint, she's pretty proud of her kids for copying her and learning the lessons and applying them to the ground. You know, if we get this right, there's no telling what else we can accomplish. Maybe we'll inspire the rest of the world by showing them what's possible when we set aside our differences to work together on a common goal.
Do you know how Lee's Ferry became one of the top trout fisheries in the world? When the 15-mile tailwater portion of the Colorado River from Glen Canyon Dam to Lee's Ferry was created by the impoundment of Lake Powell in 1964, it created ideal conditions for trout. Arizona Game and Fish stocked rainbow trout and began managing this section of the river as a blue ribbon trout fishery. By the mid-1990s, the area's trout became a self-sustaining and naturally reproducing population. Anglers come from all over the world to experience Lee's Ferry, where the quality of the fishing is matched only by the quality of the scenery, as the swift-moving Colorado River winds its way through the lower segment of Glen Canyon on its way to the Grand Canyon.
Well, that's our show for today. Hope you enjoyed it. For more information, go to our website at azgfd.gov. For all the fine folks at Arizona Game and Fish, I'm Jim Paxson. We'll see you next time.